And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another special edition episode of the Assembly Call. As tonight, Ryan and I are going to take a step to the side from talking about the actual games and spend a little time talking about some future Hoosiers. As you probably know, the early signing period for college basketball begins tomorrow and spans from Wednesday to Wednesday. And Indiana has two players right now currently slated to sign letters of intent, and both of them are from Missouri. One is Juwan Morgan, a four-star forward, about 6'8", and the other is OG Anunoby, a three-star forward who was relatively unknown before having kind of a breakout summer on the AAU circuit. So we're going to spend some time tonight just talking about these guys. You know, obviously any projection of a high school player to college has to be taken with all kinds of grains of salt and caveats, but we'll talk about what we know, how these guys project, and how they potentially fit into Indiana in the future. And so, first of all, thank you to everybody watching us live. And with that, let me bring in my co-host, Ryan Phillips. Ryan, before we get into each guy specifically, his strengths, his weaknesses, what he'll bring to Bloomington, just from an overview perspective, give me your big picture thoughts on this two-man class that Indiana will have coming in next year.
Well, I think that we saw the big ticket guys in the class that just arrived on campus and is starting to get in. A huge emphasis on the perimeter and on shooting and guard, just guard play in general. And I think that this class is kind of looking to shore up another area of need, which is defense, defensive capabilities, athleticism, and more of a front court focus. And I think that there's still some guys out there. They're looking to maybe add a third guy to the class, which will probably happen in the spring. And again, the focus is going to be, inside the three-point line on offense. Looking to get some guys who have some length, some height, some athleticism, who can mix it up in the paint in the Big Ten. After we brought in such a great guard class this year, even if you include Nick Zeisloft as well, you've got a great group of perimeter guys. Now it's time to sort of focus on getting those guys who can go up and rebound the ball and defend the post on defense and things like that. And I think that's what the focus of this class is. And the two guys that are that have committed so far definitely fulfill that need to get some athleticism in the front court and and to try and add some more length and height to a team that desperately needs it right now.
And you know what's funny about the whole kind of recruiting for need and filling needs is if you look at, because as you talked about, Indiana brought in a great group of guards, right? And the big need for the last recruiting class was shooting and guard play. And that was because it was conceivable at this time last year that our front court this year could be Noah Vonleh, Luke Fisher, Hana Mascara-Perea, and Devin Davis, right? We all thought Vonleh was on a 2-year plan. He went pro after 1 year. Luke Fisher decided to transfer midseason. Devin Davis had his unfortunate accident. And so Indiana's left with Hunter Mascara-Perea. And so a year ago, what looked to be a real strength, which was down low, the depth Indiana would have inside, now is this huge gaping hole that Indiana is desperately trying to fill. And fortunately, Juwan Morgan seems like the kind of guy who may be able to do that with his height and kind of how his game, kind of sets up. So let's start with him. Let's talk about Juwan. He is the quote-unquote jewel of this two-man class. Talk a little bit about his strengths, his weaknesses, and how you see his game projecting to the college level.
Well, first of all, he's 6'8", 210 pounds. I mean, obviously, listed heights and weights for high school guys, you never know how it is. But looking at him, he's a real long, slim, athletic guy. He's going to need to put on weight at the next level, but he sort of fits a power forward mold in the sort of new wave of power forward where probably after a year at IU he's going to be able to step out and be more of a stretch four who can hit a jumper. I like his jump shot. It's not there yet. I think he over-rotates his body a little bit on it and needs to sort of flatten out to keep his body square when he's shooting. But where the guy excels is he plays above the rim. I mean, you watch tape on him and it's virtually all alley-oops and dunks and things like that. I don't think he's a super unbelievable athlete like a Hunter Mascara-Perea, but he's a guy who is very athletic and uses that athleticism to his advantage. I think he needs to get better at finishing around the rim when he's not dunking, because in the Big Ten, you're not going to be able to just dunk on everybody the way he is able to do in high school. So I'd like to see him work on finishing with both his, left and right hand, and work on some post moves and things like that. But what he's really good at is just getting in the way defensively. He's great at blocking shots. He's a developing rebounder. I think that naturally he's going to grab rebounds because of his height, athleticism, and positioning and things like that. But he's got to get the technique down, be a better guy, be better blocking out. I mean, those are things that most high school guys have to work on. I think we were spoiled with Noah Vonleh coming in, who was just a relentless rebounder already by the time he stepped on campus. And Morgan is a long, tall, athletic guy who has some skill to him. He's got a nice, like I said, a nice jumper that will need to continue to develop, but is nice and will hopefully eventually be able to step out on the floor, hit three-pointers with regularity, or at least a 15-foot jumper. But right now what you've got is a very athletic guy with a pretty good skill set who should be able to step on campus and make an impact right away, not necessarily as a starter, but as a solid role player who's going to give you minutes in the post, who's going to affect shots defensively, rebound the basketball, and then finish on the offensive end. Again, he'll need to develop some post moves and things like that, but the guy, it's a really nice hunk of clay that is gonna, he's the kind of guy who once he gets on campus and starts developing, I think he's going to develop really quickly.
And Juwan Morgan, if your mom or dad are watching, we'd like to apologize for referring to you as a hunk of clay right there. But I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Real quick, if anybody does have a question, tweet us with the hashtag Assembly Call or go to the YouTube page, ask us there. We're not going to go too long tonight, but if you do have a question, we'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so let me put you on the spot here, Ryan. What?
One more thing I want to say about Juwan Morgan. I love the kid's attitude too.
We're getting to that.
Okay.
We're getting to that.
Yeah, let's go ahead then.
Well, okay, but before we get to that, I want to just talk a little bit more about his game because we're going to talk about his attitude. But, a lot of times with high school players, we talk about kind of comparables, right? Like, who does this guy compare to? So, his hair is a lot like Kid from Kid and Play. In the face, he kind of looks like Michael Crabtree. His body, his build kind of reminds me of Devin Davis. His game, who does that remind you of? Who's the comp for his game?
It's tough to say because he's got that athleticism that takes him to another level of when I watched Christian Watford's high school tape, he was kind of the photographic negative of Morgan, where he wanted to be outside first and then go inside. Morgan is the guy who's working inside and starting to pull outside a little bit, and that's going to be the next part of his game that develops, I think. So
is he a better athlete than Watford?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
okay.
But it was just interesting watching him. He has sort of that same lanky build. Almost looking at Watford, you expected him to be more of a bouncy athlete because of how he was tall and lanky and had really long arms and things like that. And Morgan is definitely a better athlete than that. But it's interesting to say if you put them side by side when they were coming out of high school, they look a little bit of the same. Their games are complete polar opposites. It's like someone flipped a switch. Mm-hmm. But just looking at him on film, I was thinking, watching go up and down the floor, I'm thinking Watford, and then you watch the game develop, and he's nothing like him, in his game. But I think that he's the kind of guy who the goal for Indiana would be to have him be able to play like that on the perimeter. Maybe not be, he'll never be as good a shooter. Watford was a special talent at that. But to be able to play outside and then take it inside, because that'll give the threat that'll open things up for him on the inside. So it's hard to give a comp on him right now because offensively he's just a dunker, and you'd really like to see some more post moves and things like that. But he's certainly somebody IU fans can get excited about, and someone who should come in and be able to have an impact.
And we're going to want him to be able to step out because I think Tom Crean's offense seems to function better without a big man clogging the lane a lot, and especially with the guards that we have, having a guy be able to step out to open up the lane, I think will help. No, we talk about his athleticism. He's not on a Brandon Dawson level athleticism. He's not up there, but he's kind of in that mid-tier, in between a Watford and a Dawson. A good, solid athlete, certainly a good enough athlete in the Big Ten to where if he can add that range on his game, he can be multifaceted and do a lot of things.
And when you combine his solid athleticism with the length and the height, you get a guy who can play pretty well above the rim, but he's not Honor where he's dunking on 13-foot or 12-foot rims or anything like that. It's not that big, but when combined with his height and his length, the athleticism adds another tier to his game.
So let's talk about his attitude, because I think that's one thing that a lot of IU fans have noticed is, he sounds like what IU fans want their players to sound like, right? I mean, let me pull up here. I had his transcript from his press conference when he announced from inside the hall. And, the first question is reiterate again some of the factors involved in your decision to select Indiana. Well, first off, academics was always the first thing I want. I want to get my degree. The other school that came down between Indiana and Vanderbilt, and Stanford was in there. He's a very academically focused type guy. Says a lot of the right things about leadership, wanting to go in and be a leader. He's got, his Twitter profile picture is already Indiana. He sounds like a guy that's really buying into everything that Indiana basketball is about. Even though he's not from Indiana, he's from Missouri. He sounds like what we would want an Indiana basketball player to sound like, and it's impossible to project from what a high school senior says to what they'll do when they get into college. But at the very least, there certainly are no red flags there. Sounds like a solid all-around guy who, there shouldn't be any issues there.
Yeah, I think that also you're looking at when all these issues came up with the team a few weeks ago, he's quoted as saying it made him even more excited to get there and help sort of change the culture and be there for his teammates and things like that. And a lot of people might have taken a step back at that point, like, hey, what's going on? And it just seemed to amp him up even more to be on campus and be involved and be fixing things, as opposed to, just coming in and not being a leader because he's going to be young on the team and he's going to be one of the younger guys. So I think that kind of attitude is rare and was really heartening to see that a guy is interested in getting here and making an impact, not just on the court but off the court, and buying into the family aspect of the program. And that's a huge deal, because that gets people invested, and when you're invested in the program, you work harder, you are there in every facet, not just on the court.
I was watching some video of him from back when he was a freshman, and his coach was talking about the transition he had to make from his freshman to sophomore year, or his freshman year, where I think the coach wanted him to play varsity starting out, but he really wasn't comfortable yet, and started on the freshman team and got a little comfortable, then went up to JV, and eventually they got him up to varsity. And then his first game in varsity, he scores like 22 points and has 12 boards. I mean, just absolutely dominates. So, and he talked in that interview about how obviously his number one goal is to make it to the NBA and how he's going to make it there, which is not uncommon for a guy of his size and skill and age. So there's clearly a belief and a confidence there. But here's the other thing that I really like is, and again, this is credit to Inside the Hall who compiled this the day that he committed. But the question was asked, what have you done to improve your game over the last 12 months? And I love this answer. He said, playing with Mocon, which was his AAU team, really opened my eyes. There's tons of people better than me out there. I don't like people being better than me, so that just made me put in work to get to the spot where they are and eventually pass them. And I think it is somewhat rare, to see a guy with that combination of pride in his ability and humility in understanding that there's better people and what that means. And so he does, just through comments, never met the guy, but just the comments that you read, seems to show a maturity a little bit beyond what you might expect from a high school senior, and we'll see if that translates, but certainly a lot of positives there overall from him. So, I mean, go ahead.
One thing to note also is, I didn't mention this earlier, was that he was in the Nike's Elite Youth Basketball League in 2014. He was the most improved player in the season, and that's a league where there's a lot of phenomenal players going at it, and he was the guy who was most improved, and so you like to see that trajectory of a guy who's not just peaking in high school. He's still improving, still learning his game, and still willing to improve every aspect of his game. And that's a big deal, because when he gets on campus, that's going to be a steep learning curve to play in the Big Ten.
Well, and when you read comments about Juwan Morgan from recruiting experts, and when you read comments about OG Anunoby, who we're going to talk about in a second, the one through line between the two guys, now their games are pretty different, but the one through line between the two guys is everybody seems to say, these guys haven't peaked. There's a lot of room for improvement. The best is yet to come. And I want to caution Indiana fans who may be looking at this and saying, okay, we got this two-man recruiting class. Okay, one guy's a 4-star, that's good. The other guy is, 247 Sports had him as, composite 237th ranked guy, something like that. It may It doesn't have the sexiness of when Cody Zeller came in. It doesn't have a flashy name like the Movement with McDonald's All-Americans, any of that. But just remember that, the last time Indiana had a relatively unheralded two-man recruiting class of guys who were under the radar, but people were saying, hey, there's potential there, was Victor Oladipo and Will Sheehy, which, if you ask me, that was the real movement for this program because that's what kind of got the swagger back. That's where, things started to turn. So that's a huge bar for these guys to be measured against. But I only say that just to make the point that you don't know. You never know till the guys get on campus. But it's nice to see that these aren't guys who peaked as juniors and kind of their rankings fell. They've been rising. As people see more of them, they like them more. And that is good because, say what you will about Tom Crean, but individual players have improved under his tutelage. It hasn't always translated into a cohesive unit, but the players themselves have improved. And if these guys can do that, they've got a chance to be really good players because they have the tools. So we've talked about Juwan Morgan, who seems like more of a sure thing, more of a guy who can probably come in right away and get minutes. Then there's OG Anunoby, who is a tall, slender, and tall. I think he's 6'6", 6'7", a slender athlete. Not necessarily known as a shooter, but known as a good defensive player with long arms, a good athlete, can finish. He's a guy who was really off the radar and has really come on the radar, and a lot of teams came in late in his recruitment. Georgia was in there, Iowa was in there, so there were big schools in there, even though he's relatively unheralded. Tell us a little bit about OG Anunoby, because I will say that a lot of the scouting reports about him sound like Oladipo. They're not as good. Oladipo was a little bit more highly regarded in high school, but it kind of sounds like that. An athlete, a hardworking guy, that needs to have some skill development to really unlock his potential.
I'd say that's a fair comparison. I'd say at this point he's sort of more of a poor man's Victor. He's taller. He's got more length than Victor had. But, as a junior, he was an all-state guy, averaged 21.3 points, 9.9 rebounds, 3.4 blocks, and was a first-team All-State. But, yeah, you're right. Nobody really jumped on his recruiting. Jumped into his recruitment until this summer when he started playing some better competition. And he's really the kind of guy that I think had he held on and waited till the spring, he may have gone up in the rankings and may have had more teams after him. But he visited Indiana, and I guess he just felt that was the right fit, and he was ready to go. He's a tall guy, about 6'7", 215, 210, but he plays more like a guard. He's not. He's going to be a forward. He's a small forward. That's really his spot. But he's probably still growing. He's athletic. He's a guy who is good at a lot of things, but not great at any one thing. So there's a lot of places he needs to round his game out. He says he shot. I think his quote was that he shot 44% from three last year. On tape, his three-point shot. I mean, it's solid. I think it takes too long to get it off. I think he's going to need a quicker trigger at the next level, or guys are just going to be able to close out and close down on him. I think his ball handling needs improvement, but out in the open floor he plays well. He's got pretty good court vision. I was actually impressed with his court vision because he wasn't handling the ball necessarily in the AAU videos I was watching. He wasn't really handling the ball as the primary guy, but when he'd get it, he usually had a pretty good idea what he was doing, whether going to the hoop or looking to pass. He's quick. He's good on the bounce, good on the break, and pretty good at finishing around the rim. I'd like to see more, working with his left hand. He's pretty much all right hand right now. But again, he's a guy who has a lot of natural talent, and so it's just a matter of refining that talent, getting him in a college weight program, and having him be able to drill and take his skills to the next level. Again, he's a guy who is super athletic, very long arms, can play defense, athletic enough to be a shutdown defender if he refines his footwork and things like that. So it's a really nice pickup, but I just think that he's going to be a guy who is maybe a rotation guy in his first year where he doesn't get a ton of minutes, and you're hoping he develops rapidly because of all those skills that he's got that are just on the brink of being really good.
So he actually sounds a little bit to me like Troy Williams. I mean, what you described sounds a lot like Troy. I don't think he's that level of athlete, is he?
He's a notch below that. I think Troy is an elite athlete, and I think that Anunoby's a notch below that. He's a better shooter than Troy was, and not quite the elite finisher. Like I said, there's a lot of things he does pretty well, but he's not really elite at anything. I mean, just from my observation of him. So it's one of those things where just with time and development, he can get there with some of these skills, like his shooting, like his finishing and things like that. But it's just not there yet, and so it'll take a little bit of time with him. But you've got to be excited about anytime you get a guy who's 6'7", 215, plays on the wing and can do a lot of things that make you notice him on the court. That's a good pickup, and I think that he'll be fine. He just needs some time to develop.
And by the way, the OG stands for Ogugwa, which is his given name, Ogugwa Anunoby. Here's a quote I think people like. This is, and credit for this goes to Steve Jones of the Courier-Journal. And he's quoting Jerry Meyer of 247 Sports, who says about OG, OG is more of a raw athletic type talent who has great defensive versatility. It's going to be interesting to see how he fits in, but he sort of seems like that Will Sheehey type wing that has come to Indiana, but even longer and more athletic. He's kind of an unknown quantity, just didn't have a ton of exposure, so he could be one of those sleeper type guys who ends up a lot better than anybody expects. Again, just also hinting at the potential. Both these guys seem to have that untapped potential that the more people see them, the more they like them, which certainly bodes well. And it would, of course, be great for the show if there's another Will Sheehey type for you to pick on game after game. So hopefully that happens.
Please, OG, have better shot selection. I beg you. Will took years off my life. It's a plea from an old man.
So, all in all, I mean, it seems like a good two-person haul for Indiana. Both guys have a lot to like. Clearly there are skills they need to develop and ways they need to improve to become big contributors. And, we'll see how they do. Again, they got to get on campus, they got to play, they got to go through the rigors of the Big Ten for us to really see, how they're going to be. Because, I mean, when Hunter Mascara-Perea was coming out of high school, just based on his highlight tape alone, everybody was going crazy and thought he was going to be the next big thing. It's taken him a while. And he's developing into a good player, but it takes some guys a while. Do you see, obviously it sounds like OG is a guy who could, maybe kind of like Victor did as a freshman, come in spots for defense and do some things like that, but it sounds like it'll take him a little bit longer to get into the rotation. Juwan, given the issues that we have down low, sounds like he could and may have to step in and play right away.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of the things about when Victor showed up is we didn't really have much else. It was easy for him to sort of get into the rotation at the guard spots because we didn't really have a ton of depth there when he stepped on campus. He got to be a freshman and got to be a rotation guy, whereas the guys before him had to step in and play right away no matter what and play starters minutes because of the rebuilding we were going through. But, yeah, I think that you're going to see a guy who, like Jerry Meyer said, defensive versatility. He could probably guard 4 spots on the floor. And that's invaluable when you're playing in the Big Ten, where a ton of guys can do a ton of different things, and you're playing some of the top talented, the top talent in the nation. You need versatility, especially if you get into foul trouble and things like that. Having a guy that can go 1 through 4 defensively is invaluable. As far as Morgan, I think that he's the guy you're counting on to do some things and to come on campus and contribute right away. I think a group of Perea, Emmett Holt, hopefully Devin Davis comes back and is healthy, and that's a pretty solid rotation. We're also looking to add a third guy to this class, and there's a big man out there who I think a lot of Indiana fans will be happy to snag, but he's not going to sign until the spring. So you're kind of you're hoping that there's another pure big man in this class, but you never know how that's going to turn out. But as far as who's going to step in and do something, I think that Morgan is going to be the guy who contributes right away in a more substantial capacity.
Well, yeah, and then of course there's guys like Emmett Holt that reclassify in the fall and step on campus a week before classes start. So you never know. And who knows? Maybe Yogi, James Blackman Jr., Robert Johnson all go pro, and next year at this time we're wondering why the hell didn't we get some shooters? I mean, like a lot can change in a year, as this program has proven, because every year it seems like we're starting over. But either way, a lot to like about these guys, their games. and definitely a lot to like just about the attitudes it seems like they're bringing. Both guys seem really excited. You know, you look at their Twitter feeds, they're tweeting each other and getting excited about playing together, and that really means nothing, but it's fun stuff to, you know, help hold us over during the cold winter months.
What's
And
really funny is for me about basketball recruiting is these guys are committing. They haven't even played their senior years yet. You know, I mean, it's basketball recruiting is so different than football in that these guys still have so much time left because of the early signing period. So they're already locked in, ready to be at Indiana, and they still have a year to go. So it's
yeah.
it is nice to see them get that excited a year away from even stepping on campus.
Yep, it is. Well, Ryan, thanks for taking the time tonight to talk about these guys, and we'll see. I think the latest reports that we saw is Juwan's expected to sign tomorrow. OG apparently is going to wait until next week to sign. His coach, you know, according to Jeff Ravjohn, said that you know, he's still a solid commitment, just waiting a week for some reason, kind of like Andy Bottoms is waiting, you know, 4 games to join us on the assembly call this year. So some guys just like to wait. It's cool, but. Yeah, I mean, it's cool. Doesn't sound like there's any issue there, though. So I think expect both these guys to sign and be Hoosiers next year. Any final thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I think it's a solid class. I think it's one of those things where sometimes people say you can't recruit for need because you don't know what's going to happen, you know. And of course, we talked about that earlier. You don't know what's going to happen, but at some point, you do need to find focus and plug holes on your roster, and I think that's what these guys do. You get 2 guys who fit really well in openings that are on the roster currently, and I think that both guys seem like great kids and are really excited to play for IU, and I think that infusion of enthusiasm is needed right now.
Absolutely. If you have not gotten on the email list, assemblycall.com/subscribe. We had one of our biggest days ever for signups today, which is awesome. So thank you to everybody who signed up. The reason, of course, is that everybody wants to get on that list so they can start getting Andy's post-game analysis emails, which probably start for the SMU game. So get on there. I sent an email to our subscribers today with an absolutely spectacular link that I found. If you haven't read Zach Osterman's article yet about the 1989 recruiting class, speaking of recruiting, go check that out. It's a great read just about how that class came together, what all those guys are doing now. If you were like me, that was kind of when you came up as an IU fan, and so it was really fun reliving those memories. And again, that is a great example that, you know, the recruiting lists don't always tell us, you know, what we know. Pat Graham was, you know, was Mr. Basketball. I believe he and Greg Graham were the 2 McDonald's All-Americans, and Calbert Cheney, who people didn't really know because he got hurt his senior year, came in and from day one was the star and was the team's leading scorer. Lawrence Funderburk was also spectacular. And probably the most interesting part about Zach's article are the comments of Lawrence Funderburk as he looks back on his time at IU. So I won't spoil them for you, but go check out that article because it's really interesting and just a great little bit of Hoosier nostalgia for you. All right, everybody. That is it for this special edition episode of the Assembly Call. Thank you for listening live. Thank you to everybody who is listening on the podcast. We appreciate it, and we will be back Friday night after Indiana hopefully moves to 1-0 with their first real victory that counts over Mississippi Valley State. We'll talk to you then.